Hello and welcome to another episode of Ewell Acres. Today, as we continue talking about garden plants, we're going to be discussing biennials, the advantages, disadvantages, and help you give some information to decide whether or not you want to grow them. Let's get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. As a quick side note, if you like what we're doing, if you're getting value out of these videos, please don't forget to subscribe, click on that bell for notifications. Not only does it help us out with the YouTube algorithm, but it helps us to spread the videos a little bit further so that way we can learn from each other with each other. Now, in looking at biannuals, first we need to figure out what is a biannual. A biannual is a plant that lives its entire life in two growing seasons. Meaning that the first year, it's going to germinate from seed, it's going to start to form some roots, it forms a rosette, and then you have winter that hits. It's going to go dormant for the winter. Then, it's going to start to blossom, grow on that second year. It's going to form its stems a lot larger, it's going to form the larger rosette, the flowers, it's going to produce seed, and die in that second season. Meaning by the second season, the roots, the stems, and the leaves all are going to completely die. So a biannual is a life cycle for 2 seasons. Now we're going to take a look at some of the advantages of a biannual. Now historically speaking, biannuals are going to be a 2-season plant. However, if you can trick it into getting cold weather and you want to get seed out of it a little bit earlier, most predominantly your onions and carrots, you can sometimes get seed that very first year in production. Meaning that you're going to be able to have seed for next year to continue to grow it, producing your own seed. Now you'll want to take a look to see whether it's an heirloom variety versus an F1 hybrid, because if you have an F1 hybrid and you're able to produce seed, oftentimes the children of that pairing of the parents is going to be different and oftentimes not as high quality as that F1 hybrid parent. So double check if you want to save your own seed, if you want to go to work at that, try and look for heirloom varieties because your success rate for having consistent tastes or consistent crops from year to year is going to be much more successful. Another thing that is a great advantage about biannuals is even though they are considered a 2-season crop, depending on how you grow them, they can be produced to harvest in the very first year. Some very key benefits of this that you can see examples is going to be your onions and your carrots. Technically speaking, they are biannuals. However, the vast majority of all gardeners kind of think of them as annuals because when you plant them, they will grow up, form a major large root system, and you can harvest them that very same year that you plant them. Another really great advantage of biannuals is because they have a relatively short life cycle and transfer over, they are typically going to be much cheaper in cost. Your carrot seed, your onion seed is very cost effective, meaning you're going to be able to plant a lot of it year after year if you like those crops. And the final thing why I love biannuals so much is they happen to take up a very small space. When you're dealing with some perennials, they can be very large, very space intensive, meaning your apples, trees, maybe you have some berry bushes. Now, there are advantages to having those perennials, meaning you can get crops year after year after year. But when you're trying to plan your garden and dealing with crop rotation, because biannuals are a lot more in movement in nature and take up a smaller space, you can grow a lot of them in containers. You can grow a lot of them in small raised garden boxes. So if you have a very small gardening space and you're trying to decide what area or what plants you want to grow in that, biannuals are a very great decision to make due to that nature of having a very small area that they can grow in. Now, in dealing with biannuals, because they are good in growing in small areas, they do tend to be a little bit more prone to diseases, insects occasionally, just like all plants can be. But because of their nature and being movable season after season that they can die, by doing a system that's called crop rotation, you can break that disease cycle and moving them from location to location to help minimize the types of herbicides or insecticides that you may have to spray on it because you're using cultural mechanical means of controlling some of those issues rather than using chemical means to control it. So if that is something that you are concerned about, that really helps to break up that potential danger cycle. Now that we've talked about some of the advantages about biennials, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the disadvantages of biennials. Now, when you're looking at biennials, we talked about one of the advantages of them is you are able to trick them into becoming seed that very first season. So your onions, your carrots, if you give it a little bit of cold weather, you can trick that plant into producing seed heads. Now, the disadvantage of being able to get seed is oftentimes it's going to be doing a term that's called bolting. When you have a plant bolts, very quickly, it's going to make the edible plants very bitter. So you're dealing with your lettuces, your cabbages, your carrots, your onions. It's going to make the product bitter so you can no longer have it as edible. So if you're looking to seed, count out being able to harvest that exact same product for your produce to consume it. How does this happen? Oftentimes, if it's a leafy green, it's going to make those parts very bitter tasting, not pleasant. When you're dealing with carrots, onions, it will tend to turn those products very woody, not having. One other nature of biennials that is going to be similar to annuals is they do not handle cold weather well. That's one of the reasons why, naturally speaking, historically, wherever they're from, they generally come from very cold climates. As a defense mechanism to help prolong the generations year after year, perennials decided to make themselves bigger, stronger, that can actually handle that colder weather. Biennials, their growth strategy is just to die, and then let the seed continue on generation from generation. So yes, they do have a very short life cycle. They do not do well in cold weather. So if you live in a very cold climate, that's going to greatly reduce the longevity of your growing season that you could potentially get out of those biennials. Another major disadvantage in dealing with biennials that I kind of touched on and part of the advantages is because they have a very short life cycle, because they're very moderation, they're not going to be as strong, meaning that they are going to be more susceptible to bugs, aphids, leaf miner, various diseases that can greatly affect them. Now, in the advantages, we talked about how you can rotate the crops using crop rotation to mitigate that issue, but that is one thing to keep in mind is biennials are going to be a lot more susceptible to diseases than your perennials or some of those other plants. Just like annuals, biennials are going to have a lot more time invested in it in trying to help them out. So your perennials up front, there's going to be a little bit more care that it requires, but the overall maintenance for an apple tree is going to be much less time than it would. You're probably going to be spending the exact same amount of time on an apple tree as you are a head of lettuce. You've got your weeding, you've got your watering, you've got your disease control that you have got to consider. There's your harvesting. Your amount of work and labor that you put into that plant is probably going to be similar to that very large perennial. The difference is the payout. It's going to be very different. So that is another major disadvantage you have to consider in dealing with biennials is there's a lot more time investment into growing that crop. So those are some of the advantages and disadvantages of biennials. Let us know in the comments below. Do you like growing annuals? Did we miss something in the advantages, disadvantages that you would like us to consider that we have not been mentioned in this video? Let us know in the comments below. What's your thoughts? Now, one final thing that I always like to mention is when you're dealing with biennials, they are not all going to be equal. There are some that are going to be from Europe, there's some that are going to be from North America, from South America. Due to our global world, we've been able to share plants all over the world, which means I've seen tomatoes, even though they're native to the Americas, you can see them grown in Europe, you can see them grown in Asia, you can see them grown in Africa. They are very mobile, and that has helped them to be successful. Because of this nature, though, people don't quite understand the potential requirements of plants and why they need what they need. A cactus is not going to need as much water as a tomato because a tomato is more native to the warmer, hotter climates of the Americas, whereas some of the cactuses are native to the very dry deserts. By understanding the historical climatic conditions of where a plant comes from, you can understand the needs and requirements that they need, nutrients, water, all that's included to help you be more successful in growing that particular plant species. This has been some of the advantages and disadvantages in talking about biannuals. Thank you so much for joining us. And once again, if you like what we're doing, if you're gaining value out of these videos, please don't forget to subscribe, click on that bell for notifications, and once again, we look forward to seeing you next time